this is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze, the journey through life. We're all on it. The only time that journey stops is when we're 6 feet under. So until then, it's time that we enjoy the journey and learn from the past. My guest today is John Lawyer, and John, I don't think you are a lawyer, right? Just have the last name Lawyer?
That's right.
Yeah. So any of you thinking that, I'm labeling him, I'm not. That is his name. And just tell us a little bit about your journey. I met you on Podmatch, and when I started reading about it, I thought, is this a journey I really want to talk about? Because I don't know anything really about the military or war other than what I see on TV. And it's not a conversation that most of us want to have, but you lived through it. So give us a little bit of background.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on the show. And I like the concept, like getting through the maze, the journey, because I really appreciate the fact that we're all on a journey, even if we don't know it. And that's kind of what life's all about. So I love that. So for me, I grew up in a small town in central Oklahoma, about 8,000 people, pretty normal childhood, 4-person family, a couple of parents, older sister, that kind of thing. Um, I joined the army straight out of high school. I knew college wasn't for me. I'd always wanted to kind of be in intelligence work. I enjoyed reading like Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan type stuff, and I'd watched Lawrence of Arabia as a kid, and it kind of fascinated me. The desert kind of drew me, so I knew that's what I wanted to do. Um, and so that was in 2000. So by the time I get done with training, get to my first like permanent station, it's probably 6 months before 9/11. And I was a counterintelligence special agent in the army. And so my job was to it's essentially counterintelligence to prevent other nations from spying on us, that kind of stuff. And to also go out and do things like collect information from people. And after 9/11 happened, that would include a lot of counterterrorism type stuff, war on terror type stuff. So my enlistment was for 5 years. And so after 9/11, I spent about 2.5 of those years in Kuwait and, supporting troops in Afghanistan. And then Kuwait was where we invaded Iraq from. So we had that going on. We're dealing with stuff. We had to deal with some pretty bad stuff. We were, in a place that was attacked by ballistic missiles, that kind of thing during the invasion of Iraq. It got pretty exciting. And then after my enlistment was done, I kind of had to decide, am I going to keep doing this? Am I going to go back to the States? Am I going to work in a cubicle in Washington, D.C. or stay out overseas? And so I stayed overseas and became a civilian, kind of doing the exact same thing I was doing just as a civilian. And I went to Iraq for about 18 months, and then came home for a while. And eventually I would end up in Afghanistan for about 6.5 consecutive years. So, in Kandahar. And I was on Kandahar Airfield, which is kind of, at the time, it was the busiest runway on planet Earth. It was 50,000 people, planes landing all the time. Our job was to keep the airfield going, to keep it safe and secure. That was our unit's job. And so did that for 6.5 years. And, through all this time, I'm working like 110 hours a week. It's, I'm fully like engrossed in my job. It's rocket attacks and, there's truck bombs and, it's a whole thing. And as you can imagine, like there's all this stuff, bad stuff that happens, but you kind of push that out. And then there's all this exciting stuff that happens. So it's really, you've got all that adrenaline, you've got all, you become almost like a war junkie, I guess, for lack of a better term, right? And you don't realize it, because you're in the boiling pot, right? You don't realize you're in the boiling pot if you're in the boiling pot all the time.
So,
and so eventually,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just listening to it, I just can't imagine, living through that with the war going on around me, but still trying to do my job and be calm and collected.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I think that different people handle it differently, and the whole time you're doing it, you watch different people handle it differently, and they teach you to handle it. You're taught to handle it. And for me, I mean, I was afraid at times. There were times where I would be afraid to go to a certain place, and for me, it went up and down. Sometimes, like, we would get rocket attacks where you'd have inbound rockets, and they're so random, like they're not very accurate. So you never know what's going to happen with it. So you decide, like, sometimes that scared me, and sometimes I was like, yeah, whatever happens, happens. So even within myself, like, there was different ways that I handled it. So, but really, you have your job. I thought that my job was important. I thought that it meant something. Um, I I started out in the beginning like kind of an idealistic youth kind of person, like really
Sure.
believing in it. And then as time went on, I realized, like, okay, I'm part of this like military industrial complex machine. It's pretty dark. We're doing some good things. We're also not doing great things, and it's kind of horrible. And you realize the enemy's often not the enemy; they're just people. And so, for me, over time, that's kind of the realization that set in for me, is that
Okay.
over a long period of time, um, we're all just kind of like trying to like live our lives and like make our way through the world.
So you stayed on, you were in Afghanistan. When did you decide, hey, it's time to come back to the States? I need to get away from all this.
Right. So I had, joined in 2000. And so about 15 years later in 2015, I had been overseas on and off for about 12 of those years. So in 2015, I'm like, I'm done. I'm burnt out. I can't do this anymore. So I went home, and when I got home, I was like, I don't really know who I am, like, outside of all that. Like, the world's kind of like gray and not moving because it's so slow. Um, so I didn't really have an identity. I knew I needed to heal. I ended up with trauma and PTSD, anxiety, depression, OCD, pretty much anything that you uh, can imagine. But I really didn't really know where to start. I went to the VA and they helped. I got paired with a therapist. She was into Eastern modalities, and so she taught me mindfulness, and she taught me meditation, and she was a hypnotherapist as well, and it helped. But I wasn't healed enough to really wrap myself in around that. But I think it started things inside of me that would eventually pay dividends on down the road. But I was lost, I would say, for about 7 years. I was just kind of like lost in the like swamp where I just um I didn't really know what to do. And so I kind of lived that way for about 7 years. And then, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years ago now, I kind of had a moment of clarity or understanding. People call it an awakening. And I wasn't really, I wasn't on a spiritual path that I knew. So it was kind of sudden and unexpected. But it was like this oneness with the universe and loving kindness, and that like I said, we're all connected. And I knew what I wanted to do with my life, and what my higher purpose was, that I wanted to help people help themselves. And I wanted to start a digital spiritual community. Um, and so that's kind of how I ended up talking to you here today.
You know, it's interesting because we think when people come back from being away for any length of time, I don't care if it's you were somewhere safe working a job for 15 years and then you come back to something that is totally different, or if it's something as traumatic as the war. Coming back to something that you're not sure of has to really play with your whole mind, body, and spirit, because you knew what to do when you were in Afghanistan. You knew when to take cover. You knew when it was okay to do, so-called everyday things. But now you're back here and you really don't have to take cover. But if you have PTSD, I'm sure there were times that certain sounds, certain movements probably triggered you to think, this is what I have to do now. And those around you probably didn't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that, and it's a good conversation to have because, like you said, it doesn't have to just be war either. The way I see it, all trauma is equal, right? No trauma is better or worse than other trauma. So, um, and sometimes it depends on how long we were exposed to that trauma. I mean, there's some people that never went to war, but they were exposed to trauma for years,
Right.
and there's some people that went to war for 6 months or a year and have that experience, and there's some people like me who were over there for a super long time. So it's there is no equating it, right?
Right.
And yeah, for me, um, I was very hyper vigilant, and I was very hyper aware of my surroundings. And I think people don't understand it. What I found, people were kind of interested in my experience, but I really found that people weren't super interested in talking about it. It made them very uncomfortable. Uh, so I never really had a chance to talk about it very often. Now, my wife of 20 years, she was with me almost the whole time. She had a very similar job to me. We were usually in the same unit, like we worked side by side. Um, which was good and bad. It's good because she can relate to me. It was bad because we were both completely broken.
Right.
But at least we understood each other. Um, so that had its ups and downs. We're still married happily. But that was an adventure in and of itself. But yeah, I found outside of my wife, my dad, maybe, like there weren't many people that would talk about it. And so I think that's isolating. That keeps you, that's another barrier to kind of reintegrating with society, which is kind of really hard even in the first place.
Well, and you were also dealing with people who either maybe didn't believe in what was going on in the Middle East. And so why were you there? And then there are other people who don't understand how horrific it could be and
Right.
how intense your job is. And so we as people tend to say, I don't want to hear about it. Okay. Oh, you look fine, John. Hey, welcome home. Um,
Right.
one of the reasons I started this particular podcast was for reasons that you just mentioned, that you needed to talk about it, but people need to hear your story so they can understand where you are at this moment in time. Because
Right.
so we expected you to get off a plane and, you know, find some place to live and go to the grocery store the next day and just be as normal as your neighbors. It's not going to happen.
Right. No, and that's why uh I like people like you. I like your podcast because that's what it's about. I think sharing our journeys is important because I think, perspective is so important for each of us, our own perspective, and then realizing that there's all these other perspectives out there, and that if we can understand them, it really shapes our view of ourselves. It shapes our view of the universe around us, and um, I think that's so important that we share experiences and grow. Right? It's all about growing, and I
Yep.
and for me, I feel like there's always things that I can be learning, so that I can better communicate with people. Because my job, I mean, I was a counterintelligence special agent. My job was communicating with people. So that was literally my craft.
Right.
But before that, I've always been a pretty good communicator. I've always been a bit empathic, even as a young child. Uh, so that kind of came natural to me. I really like to talk to people. I really like to be around people. And so for me, having come back in the state that I was in, I didn't talk to people, and I didn't I wasn't around people. So for me, that was like a double shock
Right.
to the system, as well, because over there I was always around people, and that fills you up, that keeps you connected to the world. So even though it was all this stuff that was going on, it was hard. I was connected, and so then you leave and you're not. So it's like this double shock to the system,
It,
for me.
exactly. And that's why it's so important for our listeners to understand that your story may be rough to hear. And especially if you got deep into certain things, some of us might be sitting here probably sweating more than you would be, because now it's more of a story and you've gotten through it. But it's important for us to hear, for us to understand, and it can be any kind of trauma.
Right.
My youngest son, when he was in high school, had a traumatic incident. My husband and I had no idea. He buried it, and he buried it for almost 15 years. And a year and a half ago, the person who caused it passed away. And all of a sudden, the memories just started flooding, and he shared it with us. And my husband at first said, "It's okay, that's behind you." And I just looked at my husband. I said, "No, he's buried it. Now he's got to get it out. Now he's got to work through it." And a lot of people didn't understand that. He started talking to some of his friends about it, and was like, "Oh, come on, you're doing fine now." And was like, "I may be doing fine in this area of my life, but this trauma was deep,
Yeah.
and I may get over it, I may not, but I have to work through it." And so, I've been putting it out there for him as well, helping him. And my husband finally gets it. But my husband grew up in a home where, you don't talk about anything that's uncomfortable. And I'm sure you found that when you came back to the States as well.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think that's one of the core issues for most people that are dealing with some form of darkness or trauma in their past or present. Or, you know, we're taught since we're very young children, our society teaches us, our parents and our friends and our community teach us to put this veneer up and this facade so that we don't ever actually show who we really are or what's really going on with us, right? Like everybody has to put on this air of normalness or normalcy, that okay, we're normal, we're just part of the conveyor belt of society. We've got the house, we've got the job, we go to work, we do all these things that we're quote unquote supposed to do, right? And that includes just not deviating from the norm, because people, it makes people uncomfortable, and we're conditioned to not make people uncomfortable. We're conditioned not to make ourselves uncomfortable.
Right.
And we're conditioned by society to do that. But we're also conditioned by our mind and ego to pretend that everything's okay. Because if we're alive and breathing, our mind and ego are like, well, we're alive, so we're happy that we're alive, because thousands of years ago, that's all they wanted. They just wanted us to be alive.
Right.
And so now they condition us to just maintain the status quo because we're breathing, which is not in the 21st century, we don't have all these threats to us that we used to have. So that's not
Right.
necessarily the best default state. So you have to learn to look within and say, okay, and you mentioned earlier, mind, body, and soul. It's about alignment of mind, body, and soul. And you can't be in alignment of your mind, body, and soul if you're not honest with yourself, if you're not putting your true self out there. And if each one of those aspects of your life are not okay, then the other two can't be in alignment.
Exactly.
So I think it's about breaking out of the chains of what society is telling you have to, the front you have to put on, and that facade you have to put up, and saying, I'm going to be who I am, and I'm going to accept that, which is a huge step, self-love. And then I'm going to say, I don't care what other people think. And I mean, we have to live in society, so you just can't just
Sure.
always be yourself, irregardless of other people, and just be like, well, I'm just telling it like it is. There's obviously tact, but in general, you can drop that facade, be yourself. Generally, what's shocking is, even though we're conditioned to be normal and the same, when we show who we are, often we're accepted, which seems
Well,
counterintuitive, but it happens.
and I'm sure as our listeners, out there, are going through this podcast, they're saying, I didn't think about that before, but oh, yeah, that's who I am. That's what I've done. I keep telling the story that for the first 50 years of my life, I was just trying to be somebody else because everybody else was better than me. I never said it out loud, but just trying to make people happy and then trying to emulate other people that appeared to be doing better than me. And something around my 50th birthday woke me up and said, why are you doing this? You are not happy. And look at all those other people. They're happy. Look at all the things you've done for them. Now it's time to start doing for yourself. And when I started, and I did it in bits and pieces. And so anybody out there listening, it doesn't, nothing of this happens overnight. It takes time. But when you start believing in yourself, it is so much easier, at least I think, to be around other people. You know when to say, hey, I'm not going to talk about that because you may not like what I have to say, but it doesn't mean I don't have a different opinion.
Right.
And that is important for all of us. So when you started in 2022 thereabouts to go this spiritual path and sort of offer it up, was there something that like woke you up in the middle of the night and said, this is what you got to do?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually, it was late at night. My wife was asleep, and it just struck me like a bolt of lightning. It was out of nowhere. So yeah, it was. I don't know what the actual to call it, what it was. It was just like pure understanding in a moment. And so yeah, some people it happens gradually. Some people it just kind of happens overnight. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. For me, it was just sudden.
So what did you develop that not only helps you, but helps others as well?
So I felt like for whatever reason in that moment, I felt like regardless of what your philosophy or religion or spiritual idea is that I felt like we're all saying very similar things in different ways. But we're very locked in on what we believe that it has to be right, not what.
Yeah.
So I felt like regardless of what I believed or regardless of what you believed or anybody else, that we would be able to have a conversation about it and say, hey, like we have so much in common. We probably have 90% in common. And so if we focus on that 10% we don't, we're really doing ourselves a disservice. And so it was a very universalist approach to life that I wanted to respect all philosophies, all religions, all spiritual ideas. I wanted to study them because I just felt that we're all connected. I just felt like we're spinning our wheels, and I felt like there's got to be a better way. And I do feel like there's room for authentic, meaningful connection in the 21st century in the digital age. Is like just like you and I were having a really good conversation right now, and it's meaningful, and it's over the internet, but we're more connected than I think people might give the internet credit for sometimes. So,
Well, you are so right. The connections, when you have a real conversation with somebody, okay, you're not just putting the platitudes out there. One of the reasons I do not truly prepare for a podcast, I look at somebody's bio, I determine from the bio, do I really think, this is something that I want to share with my audience? And 99% of it, it is. So I read that little bit, but I don't go out looking at websites ahead of time. And I do it for a reason. I want this to be authentic. I want when you say something, if I relate to it, to be able just to jump in and I get it.
yeah.
No, I didn't go through what you went through for 15 years. Okay. But there are other traumas that we face in life. And those same things that you went through, you can go through in your normal daily life, but just on a different scale. And when you can back down and go, yeah, it was hard for me to reassess. It was hard for me to start a new life here, but I did it because what is my choice?
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that, all of that, and especially at the end there where you say that it was my choice. And I tell people all the time, like, you sometimes at some point you'll have this realization that life is just a series of choices, and that each moment, this moment and the next moment, like every moment's a choice, and you can do anything that you want. I mean, within reason. I mean, most people in the world, not every country, but most people in the world can do whatever they want. I can go live where I want. I can go find the job that I want. Uh, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be ups and downs, but I have the choice of where I'm at today, right now, and where I'm going to go this next moment. That's pretty powerful stuff when when you start to realize that you can literally do anything that you decide to do, that you make the choice to do, and that if you're not making choices, that's a choice. Like you're abdicating that power and responsibility to someone else, and you're allowing them to then write your own story, which you should be writing your story, not them.
The big choice that we have is that it is up to us to make ourselves happy. We cannot wait for somebody else. Somebody else might make us happy along the way, and that's great. To me, that's the icing on the cake. But if I can't find something during my day that makes me feel good, then I'm not good to anybody else. That is my
Yes.
belief.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that's self-love, right? Like we have to take care of ourselves first. Like, and if we don't, none of our relationships, none of our experiences, none of the interactions anybody else have with us is going to be as good as what it could be because we don't take care of ourselves first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you and your wife came back at the same time. Did she go through the same issues that you did relating to others? And
We both had a similar experience with the healing process. We healed differently, but and she was always kind of a bit more um spiritually aligned than I was. And so her path was kind of different from mine, but yeah, it was very similar in a lot of respects.
so how do individuals find you if they want to follow you and get more of your spirituality, which, as I tell people, spirituality is not religion. Okay. It
Right.
is totally different. I didn't understand that for a long time until we happened to live on the edge of the national park here outside of Cleveland. And within the first week that I was living here, I looked over at the trail and it was like, it just brought me happiness and was like, and I was not a walker at the time. And it was like, why does that make me happy? But every morning I look out at the trees if I can't go out. And to me, it just starts off my day. It's like there's life out there and I'm bringing it in.
I love that. I love that so much. And uh yeah, for us, like our main website is kishar.org. It's KISHAR.org. That's the entrance to our community. It's where they can find our monthly memberships. It's we have one-on-one spiritual coaching and guidance. It's a nonprofit. All the funds go back into the community. We're trying to give back to the world, and our socials are there. We also have a pretty cool YouTube channel that's open to the public and uh, has useful information about that spiritual path that crosses the reality that we're all living every day that we walk through so together. So
That is
yeah,
wonderful.
check it out.
And all that will be in the show notes. So for those listening, you know the routine. Go to the show notes and the links will be there. All you have to do is click on them. You'll be able to find John. And, if you also have a story similar to John's, share it with him. I think that's really important because the more we learn from each other, the stronger we're going to be. And I'd love to see this be a more peaceful world. So thank you for all you did and all you're doing, and have a wonderful day. Okay.
You too,
Thank
Karen.
you.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye now.